All right, good evening, everybody. And like Ed said, welcome. And thank you, Sveriana, for being with us today. As Ed said, we're going to have a conversation here that I'm pretty excited about, both because I'm a geek for this stuff, having, even before being in elective office, I am one of those people where it was my job as a kid to go out and pick up the newspaper and bring it inside when I was small and read what was in the newspaper before my parents got a hold of it. And that meant reading about politics and what was going on in cities and the people who shaped the communities where we live and who steps forward to shape the communities in which we live. And I think we're going to have a great conversation about how certain people help propel other people forward and help them be successful in that work. With that, I'm going to put my glasses on because there are a couple of things here that I made notes about. You are an award-winning campaign professional focused on increasing representation in local, statewide, and national politics. You're one of Seattle Met's 100 most influential Seattleites for 2021. We'll see how 2022 goes. I mean, it feels like it's going pretty well for you guys. Also 40 under 40 from the American Association of Political Consultants. And I think we talked about them a little bit earlier and some other things that they've been involved with as well. Also of interest, so we worked together previously at the Seattle City Council at the same time, which is great, and part of how do I know how excellent your work is and what you do and how you do it. But we also have another thing in common. You were a barista at Stumptown back in the day.
Oh, yes.
I was a barista at Bulldog News back in the day. Loved it. Best job. Best job. If only they paid better.
I know. We could still be there.
We could still be there. So I'm going to ask a few questions about you and your background, like where you come from, how you get to be here, and then we're going to go into what is it that you do and why you do it. And then we're going to ask you a bunch of questions that are really almost unanswerable, like, okay, so American democracy, are we doing okay? Like, what's happening? What do you see from the inside as people are trying to figure out where they fit as stepping forward in leadership? But for now, who are you? How did you get to Seattle? Like, who are your people? All of those things.
Gosh, how did I get here? I came here in 2005. So I moved here from Nashville, Tennessee. But I'm not from Nashville. I don't really have a twang, except when I say I'm from Nashville. But
the A starts to get long there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I grew up in California, so I was born and raised in Central California. Moved to Nashville when I was about 12 years old. So I had my formative years in the South. Really wanted to come back to the West Coast. So I moved to Seattle when I was 19, and I've been here ever since. So that's what got me to Seattle. But I think what got me into politics was when I was 10 years old, I think, was the first time I ran for office. I was not successful. That's not on my LinkedIn. But I ran for office. I wasn't successful, but for some reason, and
You're 10, that's 5th grade, right? That's an election
5th grade.
thing?
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Serious?
I learned it was a popularity contest when you're that age.
So 5th grade, you learn it's a popularity contest.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't necessarily dissuade you from continuing to be interested in leadership through politics.
Yeah. I think when I moved to Tennessee was when I really got involved. Like, I was in high school. One of the most formative things I did was in high school, I co-founded the Gay Straight Alliance at my high school, Hillsborough High School. Go Burrows. We were the Burrows. That's a donkey. And that was, but that was like the beginning of my activism, was really focusing on social issues and, organizing with my peers and marching in the street. Like, we were marching in the street for gay rights and, legislation that was going to be passed at the city. And then after that, I went, and one of my first volunteer opportunities was registering voters with Rock the Vote. I think I was 18, and you could get free tickets to concerts. And I was like, yeah, I want to see Weezer. I want to see, whatever other bands. But you got to go for free and just talk to people, meet young people where they are, at concerts, and they were excited about it. And so I don't know what the impetus was for my interest in voting, but I've just always been a fan of voting and like getting other people involved.
So let's go ahead and jump to your 19 and how what is it that gets you to Seattle? And that interest in voting, I mean, I do want to touch just briefly on the bus at some point, because that's been really formative for a lot of people in the Seattle area. But what gets you to Seattle at 19? Is that going to school? Yeah?
So I transferred, I was going to Middle Tennessee State. I transferred out to Seattle University and finished there. Loved it. It was a bit smaller than the school I was at. So I had some really great mentors there that got me connected to some community organizations that were more youth focused.
And you graduated from Seattle University is that where you studied philosophy?
I knew you were going to ask about that.
Yeah.
I studied philosophy in Tennessee because I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, honestly. When I graduated high school, I actually took a semester off, and I really didn't want to stay in the South. I really wanted to come to California or Washington. I wanted to be back on my coast.
Yeah.
So I was exploring options. I ended up going to state school there and studied philosophy, English. I felt like I dabbled in a lot of different things. And when I moved here, I had so many credits in philosophy that I just decided to minor in it.
Keep going.
But
What's the philosophy that you were drawn to? And do you think about it having any bearing kind of on how you work now?
Marxism and like existentialism and all of those things. But
The collegisms.
But it wasn't enough to keep me interested.
Yeah.
Like I was drawn to sociology. I ended up getting a degree in sociology and women's studies. So.
And how many political consultants have MSWs?
I think I'm the only one.
Yeah.
And my business partner is always like, she has an MSW. She can like give therapy on the campaign trail. He like sells that
as part of the package for Upper Left. And I'm sorry, and I shouldn't do MSW. So Masters of Social Work. And so for folks who go to school for a Master's of Social Work, a lot of folks are looking to get into clinical work. They're looking to do specific client-focused work. Did you consider that for a while, or what was
Yeah, definitely. I think my first volunteer experience in Seattle was actually working with Powerful Voices, which is an organization in the Central District. They work with mostly girls of color in middle schools and high schools. So I was facilitating girls groups and doing relationship skills and doing all of that for about 3 years. So I kind of did a little bit of that work. And I think I just went the organizing route, actually. Yeah. UW has the School of Social Work has a really amazing policy and community organizing track. So that's kind of, I think, what steered me in that direction.
Do you ever run into any of the young women who were a part of those groups that you facilitated?
I do.
Through Powerful Voices?
Yes.
Yeah?
There's some women doing amazing things that have worked at City Hall.
Okay.
Yeah. Very full circle for me.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Okay, so what does a political consultant do? What does a political consultant do?
What do we do every day?
What's your job? When somebody says, "What do you do for a living?" What do you tell them? And is it actually the thing, or do you come up with an easy two-liner?
Well, I mean, I tell people we help people run for office. So we basically help. Someone comes to us and they say, "I want to run for city council." And this is happening right now, where we're getting phone calls. "I want to run for city council." For one, it's December. Could you call me back in January? But no, really, we basically are, getting the nuts and bolts together of everything it takes to run a campaign, which is about 9 months of your life. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
But yeah, we help with messaging. We help with identifying voters, getting an understanding of who votes, what's the message, how are you going to reach the people that you need to reach, helping people get endorsements, which is basically, stamps of approval from organizations and elected officials and the newspaper, all of that. There's a lot of just moving parts that go into campaigning, and so we've done it many times over, and so we're just able to kind of guide people through that process.
And so Upper Left Strategies is the group. And Upper Left, I'm not going to get this exactly right, But through Upper Left, you and your compatriots at Upper Left, you say we are about increasing representation in elective office, in
Yes.
politics and elective office. I think I know what that means, but because it's my job to ask the obvious questions. What does that mean? Why is that the mission? What is it getting at?
Yeah, I mean, the mission for us, we started back in 2018. So the mission for us, we just really saw that there was a lack of consultants of color. There were really none at the time. A lack of candidates of color, a lack of young candidates. And so for us, it was just really important to be a resource for people that want to run. Because what would happen is you might get a person of color candidate, you might get a young person that's really excited, but there's no consultants to help them. They don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to be there for folks that maybe didn't have the resources or the understanding to know how to do it.
You had worked with campaigns before this. Your business partners had met in campaigns before this, and you saw this niche where there weren't consultants of color. And then, how did you approach the job in a way that you think is different from the way the other consultants do their work? What is it the magic that makes you the better consultants for a young person, a young candidate of color?
I love that question because I think both my business partner and I worked with other consultants, very mainstream, successful consultants. We saw what they did, and we thought we could do this a little bit better because I think what we're able to do is really tell the life story of a candidate in a way that connects with voters. And to do that, you're really connecting with values. We actually walk our candidates through a process that is, what's your life story? What have you overcome? What are you proud of? Why do you do what you do? And what are the values that come from all of those experiences that you've had? And then how does that inform the policies that you want to pursue when you're in office? So there's really a natural kind of flow to the message, and we're able to just craft it in a way that I think really reaches people in a way that's not just, I'm running for office to run, but I really have a purpose. And people, I think, trust that. I think that they understand that, that person wants to serve them for a reason. And it's worked for us. It's worked well for us.
Yeah, it's worked pretty well for you all. I mean, you all have a pretty good reputation and a continuing to grow reputation for the work that you do with younger candidates of color. In general, my impression is that a lot of the work that you all are particularly successful with, you've got candidates who are in the city for sure, but it also seems like there's an evolution of who's voting and who's visible in the it used to be called the suburban ring. I don't think we call it that anymore. But in the growing mid-level cities around in the south part of King County, in the eastern parts of King County. And is that a correct observation? Like, is the voter dynamic changing there? Are the people who are stepping forward to lead changing there? What's different there about how, I guess, both in the city, but mostly what people are sort of observing in South King County? What's different?
South King County is where it's at right now. Like, I actually think it's kind of hard to run in Seattle right now. People ask me if I'm going to run in Seattle. I'm like, there's a pipeline. There are people that want these seats. But if you go outside of the city, I think there's more opportunity. I think, there's just so many more seats and opportunities. Like Renton, like Burien, SeaTac is like such a more diverse city council than it used to, Tukwila. And I think we saw it in this last election. It's very democratic. Even if it's moderate, it's still democratic. Mm-hmm. And so there's room for young folks to run and be progressive, but also, again, like share values with people. We had Carmen Rivera, for example, in Renton, very progressive woman. Father was a cop. Put that on a mailer. It won an award. Like, we're talking, like, how do we reach the voters and talk about public safety issues they care about with this person that is actually, like, pretty radical. And she won.
In Renton.
But
I think that's a really great example because folks who are kind of growing up in these communities and saying, yep, now it's my time. Mm-hmm. And I feel confident enough to do it.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot more resources for people that want to run. Like you mentioned the Washington Bus, mm-hmm. which was probably what got me actually really involved in politics in Washington State, was just learning how to run a campaign and meeting everyone. Like I grew my network, when I did that fellowship way back in 2010.
Yeah.
It's been around for probably 15 years now. And they train young people how to basically run campaigns, organize volunteers around issues they care about. They also do like a fellowship every summer, and they also register people to vote. So that's a huge part of their work, is just voter engagement, and it's non-partisan. They're typically not supporting certain candidates, but they're just really trying to get young people to vote. So they go to concerts, Capitol Hill Block Party, they're like down in the community, down here, like trying to just meet people where they are. They're huge, getting young folks involved, which means like they're getting young folks to be staff on campaigns or, organizers in the community. So they're great. And there's also programs like Emerge Washington. They get women to run for office. They train you how to do it.
Yeah.
So we often send our clients there.
Yeah.
And then the Women's Political Caucus of Washington as well is really amazing. So these resources they're kind of new in the last 10 years or so, and I think that's also helping.
All of these that you just mentioned are also organizations that are primarily on what we will loosely call the left. Democratic, progressive. I know that there's a whole range in there about words that we're using now. Who does what you do on the right side? Is there anybody doing this? I mean, King County and Seattle are kind of tough, or at least King County is, I think, evolving to be tougher in that way. But is there anybody who does what you all do on the right side?
You mean like training or consulting?
Consulting.
I mean, I don't want to name names, but there are some consultants on our side that have started leaning toward that direction.
Yeah.
But
Is that something you all would do? Like so you're running a business. You have bills to pay. You have to take on clients. You've got to do work. Have you talked with candidates where you get to the point where you're like, no, not for you. We're not. That's not what's going to work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's usually about values match.
Okay.
And it's not always, we've only ever worked with Democrats. We're also, we kind of have to because we're on a list if we're working for state candidates. But I mean, we worked with Denny Hex, lieutenant governor's race. We worked with Marilyn Strickland, and these are awesome Democrats, but they're more moderate. Mm-hmm. And I think, we've got Joe Wynn in West Seattle, who's like a very progressive, he was our first candidate. So we've got the gamut, but I think we're never going to run a Republican.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
So we were talking about this beforehand, and we won't spend too much time on this, but it is fascinating. So if you met a candidate who didn't identify on the Democratic part of the spectrum, because this is where you all do your work. We could do another of these, just to be clear, we could do another of these conversations with a Republican consultant, and maybe we will next year, because that's super interesting as well. But you are our target tonight. So, but you have some restrictions on how you can do this work, because there is a system in place that says, hey, Democratic candidates, if you are going to receive support from the party, if you are going to get access to voter lists and all of this, you can't work with just anybody. We're not going to trust that you're going to work with some unknown sketch outfit, operating out of the back of a bus. You have to be on a Gold Star list.
Yes.
And if you're not on the Gold Star list, then you run the risk of candidates saying, well, if I can't get access to the voter list in order to get out the vote and in order to do messaging and get my word out, I can't work with you. You're kind of stuck with that, which sounds a little restricting, and yet I get sort of the fidelity to people who know what they're doing as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when we weren't on the list.
As you're as you're starting out, you have to figure out how do I get on the lists I need to get on, and how did you all do that?
There's a list.
Right? Did you guys go through that?
We did. I mean, we basically got our little hand slap when we first started because we were undercharging, and at the state level, there are just really strict guidelines around how much you charge, and just we're on the list now. We're obeying. But yeah, but it does speak to a little bit of the problem with, we don't have to get into this too much, but like the two-party system, and where you've just got a really strong party presence in our elections, especially at the state level, that are just very restrictive about who gets what resources.
And then being able to break in as a new crew.
It's very hard.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so for the uninitiated, what does it mean that we just had midterm elections? Midterm of what? Like, what's that about?
The presidential term.
Oh,
Joe Biden.
we all live by that clock, right? Like, how many? Because I think many of us live in the circle where we're like, of course it was the midterm elections. Everyone knows that. Most of America is just like, I don't know, midterms of something. What does it mean?
Well, usually the midterms, the 2 years, the halfway mark, basically, for the presidential election is a lot of Senate, the Senate races and the House races. It's typically where Congress flips to the opposite party, usually every time.
Why is that?
Because that's just how politics works. People are like, we've had it, we look at...
We gave them 2 years.
We gave them 2 years. We look at the numbers, inflation's on the rise. There's always an economic thing. The other party is just much more able to say, we need something different. And we often think about elections in terms of change or more of the same. A midterm is like, we need change. The Republicans, in this case, are arguing for that. It didn't work this time.
Yeah. Why is that?
The Trump effect.
Is that what? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It seems to be a lot of national chatter about why the
Yeah.
red tide was really more of a drip.
Yes. I think
yeah.
just the extremism. I think we saw that voters really rejected extremism.
Okay.
And, election denying, those
Yeah.
sorts of things. People are like, no. we've seen what that was, we saw what that was like.
I think we have, I think we have some of these stereotypes also about where those conversations are happening. So we hear about Arizona, we hear about Georgia, all of that. To what degree is that the election denying, the I guess undermining or casting aspersions on the integrity of voting? How much of that did you see in the Washington dialogue, in the state dialogue, or even in the King County dialogue?
I think we definitely saw it in the congressional race down in the Southwest, where a Democrat flipped the congressional seat.
Right.
That was amazing. That was
Yeah.
probably one of the biggest victories of all this year.
Yeah.
I think locally we saw, it wasn't as extreme, but I think there were definitely, I'm thinking of like the 47th district down south.
Yeah, where's the 47th
Claudia
for folks?
Kaufman, it's like Federal Way
Mhm.
down south, South King County.
Yep.
That was a very purple district. It went to the Democrat. And I think you just saw, honestly, I think abortion was a big issue. And I think that the Republican side really wanted to basically pretend that was over. And they wanted to focus on safety. And we saw safety is the issue.
Yeah.
We kept talking about abortion. We kept talking about freedom. And that actually gets people interested, because they're like, it's not really about abortion. It's about freedom, and don't tell me what to do with my body.
Which seems like a really interesting approach to how we're using words in the country right
Yeah.
now. Because a lot of people, when they're thinking about words that are coded in a particular way, there's sort of a deferring to, in general, broad brushstrokes here, there is a general deferring to say, oh, freedom, that's a Republican word. That's patriot flags and things like that. That's a Republican thing. But it's interesting then to flip it around and say, well, no, in some of these, the other side, the Democrat side, is going to make an argument to say, well, no, actually, this is the freedom that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And you said you were for freedom. So it's been interesting to see some of those flip around. So you mentioned the congressional race in Southwest Washington, which this will get us back into the Trump effect, which to some degree, the Democrat wins the seat because the district takes it out on the incumbent Republican for voting for impeachment. And then they end up with a Democrat representing them, which
Right.
is just sort of doing the whole curly Q game board thing about how you get to the end. Not I mean, no one's going to predict. I mean, does that seat stay Democrat? Does that seat is it just a purple district now, like where it's hard to predict what it is?
I think, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance. I mean, she's going to have incumbency. Like, that's huge. Like, having an incumbent that is, has a fresh slate, is obviously connected with voters, was able to win. I think that's huge. It speaks to, I think it does speak to the changing, demographics, the changing, just the changing of the district.
To some degree, so going back to the incumbent is ousted because she voted for impeachment, and that's an extreme example of the whole narrative nationally about Trumpism, extremism, and that effect on candidates. At a lesser level, there's a whole reality that's playing out for us where compromise and bipartisanship doesn't seem like it's particularly well rewarded, and it also seems like to some degree candidates who are thinking about coming into office need to position themselves as more extreme if it's a super blue district or a super red district.
Yeah, I think typically, especially when you look at primary races, you're looking at which lane are you in, and maybe in a higher level office, you're like Democrat or Republican. Locally, it's are you like a radical Democrat? Are you a socialist Democrat, or are you, a moderate Democrat? Like, that's how we see it here, because the two extreme, and they're not even necessarily extreme, but the two kind of furthest sides are going to get through. Yeah. That's just typically how it seems to work.
So can a Republican win any of the seats in Seattle? So we're districted elections now, seven district seats citywide, across the city, 2 citywide positions. And to a great extent, that was pushed through with the idea that it would make it easier for a Republican to win a district in Seattle. That seems to have not manifested at all, and perhaps been a grave miscalculation on the part of the proponents. Does a Republican win in Seattle, any place, like ever in the near future?
I don't think so.
Doesn't seem like it.
I mean, look at King County even. Like,
right. It's getting more blue, right?
It's so blue. Very blue.
Yeah. That makes me want to ask about some specific races that are going to come up next year, but I won't do that because you might be competing to work in any of those races, and so I'll keep myself from doing that. Do you end up sort of talking with candidates about, so where are you in terms of if you get into office? So you talked about walking through kind of a process with people about who they want to be and what they would do if they were in office with their issues. How do you talk with people about, well, would you be compromising? Would you be isolated because of your stances and your position? How do you navigate with people about that? Or what are there examples where you've had to have tough conversations with people about that?
I think the toughest conversation sometimes is, can the person decide where they stand and stand strong in what they believe? Because as a candidate and as an elected even, you're kind of pulled all these different directions. And so you get candidates that want to please. They want to, well, this person wants me to do this, and then this constituency wants me to do this. And it can be really tough to upset people. And we have to remind people, you're not going to make everyone happy. And actually, when you stand in your values, you're probably going to upset someone. And you have to be okay with that. I think that's the toughest thing. And so, yeah, it's the toughest thing.
I don't know if you can say, so you watch your, because you've got a fair number of people in office now who you've worked with and you continue to work with. And so you must get the texts or the calls from people about, this thing is coming up, I want to do this, but it's going to get me in trouble. Or, I don't want to do that, I'm going to cave. What do you think? Do you think that'll hurt me? And then you watch them take an action. And then do you tell them the truth at that point about what you think their action is going to mean? What happens then?
I think we definitely talk them through, like, this is what's going to happen if you do this. This is what's going to happen if you do that. Yeah. And here are your options. Because I think we all, I was going to say we all know, but we know working at the city council, passing legislation, it's a negotiation always. And so you're not going to get everything you want. You know, the stakeholder groups aren't going to get everything they want, but you're going to work your hardest. And I think even leaning on the values again, it's also about messaging your choice, right? And so you might make an uncomfortable choice, but how do we share out the reason why in a thoughtful way?
So we'll take questions from folks if anybody's got any.
Yes, as somebody unfamiliar with your work, I want to thank you for your profound and revelatory remarks today. So thank you. Knowing that in your business, you definitely look at the pipeline of candidates of color who are coming forth and so forth. I wanted to ask you, what type of infrastructure can we build so when these candidates are in office, we can help support them? I'm thinking just here in the 37th district, we've had somebody who was elected in 2020 who left. There's folks on the periphery of the 37th who were elected into office in 2020 and left because the environment just wasn't supportive when they got to the state legislature.
That's a great question. I think we need to be supportive of the people that we get elected into office, for one. I think you're right. There's a big exodus of candidates of color, mostly Black candidates, that were like, this is oppressive, I'm leaving. This is not what I wanted. This is not what I signed up for. And I think it's true. I think politicking is a game, and being in the legislature is really tough. And it's the truth. And we need to support folks once they get there. And I think that's on consultants. We need to support our clients, obviously, once they get elected. I think, there are a bunch of training organizations, actually, and this kind of speaks to your question about, like, how are we also supporting people to get into office? This is not 37th, all of the 37th, but I guess countywide. Like Gurmai Zahalai, King County Council member, has a program called Build the Bench.
Yeah, great program.
Amazing. He's like getting people, he basically does trainings every month or so online, very accessible for students and young people to learn how to run for office. I think that's amazing. I think putting our heads together around how do we actually support people in the community to run and to bring the issues that they most care about, bring those forward. I think it's necessary. I think there's not enough of it, but there's a couple of programs that are really awesome. Yeah.
If I were in my 20s or 30s, which isn't that much of a stretch, by the way, if I were in my 20s or 30s and I was thinking about running and I had friends and community that were encouraging me, I'd be afraid of at least three things. One, I don't have the money. I don't think I can afford this. Number two, somebody's going to find a picture of me in my middle school yearbook where I'm dressed as maybe the offense a hobo, and they're going to rake me over the coals for it. And thirdly, if I lose the election, I'll never be able to recover, and it may not be worth it. So those are primitive kinds of things, but what would you say to me to at least allay those fears?
Okay.
I didn't dress as a hobo.
For Halloween, by the way, but that was the thing back in my day.
First of all, the money that you're going to spend as a candidate is not your money. You are going to raise money and spend other people's money. But I do think remembering that part of the campaign structure is fundraising. And the city council is much more accessible now because of democracy vouchers. And so that's one way that you can, a lot more people are running for office in our communities just because of that. The limits are lower. People have $100. Every person in Seattle gets $100 in your mail. It'll come in February, so look out for that. But it makes running for office much more accessible. But even if you're running for like a state legislative seat where you're actually raising dollars, you're going to work hard to do it, but it's not going to be your money. So just know that. You don't have to be rich to run for office, I promise. Second question with the yearbook. Just hide your yearbook, but your social media, definitely scrub your social media before you run. That is something we will help you with. But yeah, you want to know that everything's good on that end. And then the last question was around if you lose.
And I have friends and colleagues who have lost, and I wonder, and then they disappear for a while, and I think, what happened to them?
No, I've I've worked with folks who have lost their campaigns. They usually go on to get better jobs than they had when they were running. People actually look to them as like, they've been through it. They've worked hard. People usually actually really give them higher esteem because they've run. And so I think that I've never seen someone run and necessarily, have a backlash because of it. If anything, it's a real brave thing to run. And I think a lot of people understand that.
The social media one is one of those where I think, I think schools and families are talking with young people all the time about be careful with your social media. And we can't say it often enough because I think we all see the social media, whatever it is. And so that continues to be, I think, a real a worry for a lot of folks. Christian.
Hi there, Christian Love, staff over in College Education. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your stories and your insights. 2 quick questions. What challenges do you foresee in 2024? And this is very heavy, challenging work. How do you maintain wellness and self-care throughout this process?
Oh, that's a great question.
2024.
2024, oh my gosh. 2023 hasn't even happened. The challenges for 2024, I think the biggest one I see is the Democrats coalescing behind one candidate, which we've seen not happen, and we saw what happened with that. I think that's the biggest thing, probably the biggest challenge, the first challenge, I would say, making sure that we're all on the same page, assuming we're all Democrats. I don't mean to be super partisan about this, but and for self-care, oh my gosh, I try to work out and take a walk along the beach. This morning I got up and meditated for 10 minutes because I woke up feeling frantic, and I put on my little app and just got a breath. So little things.
2024 governor's race in Washington? Governor Inslee, does he run again?
I was quoted in the Seattle Times saying, I hope not. Because what happens in Washington, and this is the challenge on the local level or statewide level, is that there is like a domino effect.
Yeah.
There
There's
are
a pileup on the
are
highway right now.
Yes,
right?
there are
Yeah.
people lined up to run.
Yeah.
There were people lined up last time around, and some of them started running for seats, and we're like, oh, I got to step back because there's the governor, there's the attorney general. Yeah.
Lands commissioner.
Lands
et cetera.
commissioner.
Yeah.
Very exciting position.
Yeah.
I mean, really, but
Yeah.
all of these positions are at play. There are people lined up for each one. That's going to be interesting to watch.
Mhm.
And I'm hearing rumors. Oh yeah, he's going again. So we'll see. We'll see. Hi.
My name's Liz Ford. I am Sally Clark's spouse, which is my qualification here. So I'm so struck in this conversation about how hard it is to talk about local politics and not have it be about national politics. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about that and what effects you think that has on people's choices to run or not run. And then I'm really interested in your thoughts about the SeaTac City Council and the kind of what's happened there over time and how you see that. So those are my questions.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that a challenge for 2023 is that it is an off-year election, and some people will call even year elections election year, and you're like, every year's election year. And there was a recent article, my colleague Michael, who does all of our data, was quoted in The Stranger last week. There's an article titled "Progressives Have a Turnout Problem." And it basically shows the differences in turnout between this year and last year. And last year, I think 55% of eligible voters voted. This year is about 67%. So that's the difference when we're looking at there's no exciting name at the top of the ballot. People don't vote. Progressives don't vote. It's why, it's how we got the prosecuting attorney or city attorney that we got. It's, there are things that are showing up because people don't vote as much. And so I think that's a consequence. And then question around CTAC. I mean, CTAC, City Council, has like transformed. I remember probably a decade or more ago when it was actually a very problematic, very problematic city council. I did organizing there around $15 an hour back in 2013, around that time. And I do think that's another example of a place where it's diversified. It's actually becoming more representative of the people that actually live there, which is amazing.
To your knowledge, what activated that? So did the push for 15 help activate and bring people out to say, I want to be a part of my community as a leader? Were there other efforts that were specific to CTAC or that area, do you think?
Yeah, I would say a big push for CTAC was the union. I used to work with Working Washington, which is a project of SEIU 775. They basically steamrolled this thing through. I mean, $15 an hour was basically a union-style organizing campaign, which means we were knocking on 10,000 doors 10 times. You were basically like, hello, this is 15, get your ballot in, making sure people got their ballots in. There was a huge organizing effort. So I think that activated people. And I think that they stayed. I think that there's a real strong effort down there because of the community, because we're talking about airport workers that live right there that are really impacted by the policies in that town. And so it was a lot easier once people are activated to keep voting. Like once you vote once, you're much more likely to vote again. And that the hard part is getting someone to actually vote for the first time.
Hi, my name is Sophia. My question is, how big unpredictable events in the world affect your work?
That's a good question.
They usually, sometimes they're called an October surprise, maybe. If they happen in October, you're like, oh, that's going to change the course of things. I think the biggest events that affect us are like the Roe v. Wade, the decision earlier this year around abortion rights. That happened kind of early in the season, and we were like, oh, this is a big deal. I had male colleagues tell me like, oh, that's over by the time we got to the general election. And I was like, oh no, women do not forget. We are not forgetting. I told them, I was like, we did not forget about this. This is showing up, and it did. So I think those sorts of issues, like really the kind of social issues, really do affect the work, and they affect the messaging. Like they affect the way that politicians talk to people. Like when they send you a mailer, it affects what the message is.
No, it's kind of shocking that there would be consultants who would say, yeah, no, that's not going to be a thing by the time we get to November. Yeah.
But in a way, they were right, because in terms of what the other side was saying, the other side was like, let's move away from that and let's talk about safety and crime.
Yep.
And when you started looking at polling, the polling said people care about crime. It's like, who are you talking to?
Wow. Fran?
Hi, thank you so much for being with us. My name is Fran. I work at the Community Engagement and Leadership Education Center at the UW. I was really struck by what you said just a moment ago about it's hard to get someone to vote for the first time, and once you vote for the one time, then you'll continue. So we've been working hard at the UW to try to build a stronger culture of student voter engagement. So my question is, what advice do you have for us at the UW, or what hopes or what call to action do you have for us at the UW to continue to get more youth to vote, not only to vote, but also to run for office?
I love that question. I think have a voter registration card and like every new student, I don't know if you get folders or what, but like that was something we actually passed at the city council, was getting voter registration in with like rental applications or something. There was something like that. But just thinking about like, how do we reach every student? Because I think students are the hardest to engage, because maybe they're voting at home. Maybe it actually makes sense for them to vote at home, depending on what state they live in. If they live in Georgia, maybe they need to be voting there. But actually like engaging, I think on a large scale is really important. And just, it takes about 7 touches to get someone to vote, and to get someone to vote for you. And so I think as much as possible, in kind of infusing whether it's voter engagement, whether it's talking about issues that are important, because the issues are really what I think connect people to candidates and make them want to vote. And I think in terms of, running for office themselves, and there's already a student from UW, signed up to run for office for 2023. I think that's awesome. I think there are great organizations, like political organizations on campus. I think partnering with groups like the Washington Bus to do trainings. I would love to come do a training. I do them all the time with groups about just how to run. Yeah, there's opportunities there for sure.
I know we've got just a couple more minutes here. You mentioned Georgia. We can't close without coming to Georgia.
I was gonna start singing it just to hand it to you.
That's right. Okay, it's today is December 8th, just to ground this for anybody who's watching this later. What just happened in Georgia, and what should we be taking away from it? Like, what did you learn from what just happened in Georgia?
I learned, I made the mistake of watching it actually as it was coming in. I was watching the TV and I was like freaking out. And then I'm like, no, we're fine. My data guy was like, oh, we're good. And I'm like, but I'm watching it go back and forth. It was very nerve wracking. But really what I think we saw in the end, if you look at the map, there are big blue chunks in Georgia. There are really, especially around Atlanta.
Is it the chunks we think they'd be, sort of the more urbanized areas?
Oh yeah. And I think it's, and they were talking even about how, of course, Atlanta is blue, but the surrounding kind of suburban counties, kind of the larger metro area is just changing. And I think that it really is just the changing demographic there. I think
What does that mean? Does that mean younger? Does it mean influx of people? Or
probably younger. I think educated. It is Atlanta is, someone called it like the New York of the South. Like they're like, this is the coolest city. I lived in the South for a while. Atlanta's very cool. But I do think it's changing. And when you get, these big cities that are just growing, you get more Democratic leaning folks. And other pockets as well. Like there's Savannah, there's a couple of other pockets where there are lots of colleges and universities. I think that impacts things. I also think in Georgia, we had the Trump effect. We had, this candidate that was probably shouldn't have been running, but was just really, blessed by Trump. And that was it for a lot of people. And in the primary, there were a lot of folks that voted for Republican governor and did not vote for Walker. Right. And so that was another thing that stood out about the primary, at least.
you mentioned the educated voters, and it seems like that's a big narrative that's developing over the past presidential election, probably before that and moving forward, a continued divide about who's considered the elite, who's considered the educated, who's considered the not elite, who's considered the struggling. Mm-hmm. And that narrative seems to be really reinforced by some parties to create the idea of who votes in a particular way. That continues, I would imagine. That probably ramps up.
Probably.
Which seems kind of painful for all of us.
Yeah. And I think in the end, I think that race in particular, oftentimes you're looking at the positive message. Mm-hmm. You know, the incumbent Warnock was able to talk about all that he had done, this vision for the future, whereas the other candidate was kind of tearing him down. And like when you go negative, people don't like negative, you know.
It's hard to sustain it over time.
It's hard to sustain it. Yeah. You want someone that'll work for you. And even if you're not, you know, even if you're working class, if you're not higher educated in that way, like you're still, these candidates, he was basically like preaching at the end, you know, that his victory speech was like, he's talking to everyday people as well, I think.
All right, I think we are going to go ahead and bring this program to a close today. I really want to thank you for being willing to do this. So greatly appreciate it. And we love highlighting a UW alum. It's not our criteria for inviting guests, but it's always nice when it works out that way.
So Fariana and Sally, thank you very much. When I think about just listening to the two of you talk, two words come to mind, leadership and courage. So thank you for representing both of those things for us today. A round of applause for Sally and Serafina. We'll bring this to a close and we'll see you in January. Thank you both.